So you're all very welcome to our new event, and this is to have a conversation about returning to the workplace, about COVID-19, and about having different conversations about mental health and about how we can change our conversations and make things a bit easier for people who might be struggling a little bit. So what I'd like to do first is I'd like to start a conversation around who we are, what we do, and why we're having this conversation. So first of all, I suppose I'm the program leader of Sea Change, and I have been working with Sea Change for 13 years at this point. I was a volunteer. I was also a workplace program facilitator, and I now run Sea Change. And the kind of work that we do is things like today's event, information sharing. We do programs where we do workshops for people in different kinds of organisations to look at how we can reduce the stigma around mental ill health. So it's not about becoming PC and not talking about specific words, but it's about how we make it okay to talk about the topic in general. It's about understanding the topic of mental health and, more important, understanding the impact of stigma. For me, I'm passionate about explaining mental health and having these open conversations because I'm a suicide survivor myself. I never thought I could get better. I never thought I could get well, and I did. There was a lot of things that I had to do to get there, and I maintain my wellness now, and my mental health stays steady because of the things I do. So hopefully today's conversation will help us have more of those healthy conversations around what our mental health is and how we can mind it, particularly at this challenging time as we return to our workplaces. So when we talk about Sea Change in China and who we are, so Sea Change is the National Stigma Reduction Programme. We have been around since 2010, and we particularly want to have conversations about mental health stigma. So this means the thing about stereotyping, discrimination, judgment, and the negative treatment of people who experience mental ill health. And so we really want to have different conversations. We want to understand the language, and we want to hear from people who have experienced mental health difficulties and mental illnesses to see what we can do differently and how we can improve those conversations. Where we came from is about, I'd say 14 years ago, the organisation that we are a project of, Shine, decided that they needed to do something. So Shine is an organisation supporting people affected by mental ill health. And when we say supporting people, we support families and we support people who are experiencing the mental health difficulty themselves. We have a number of different ways of supporting people. So we have centres in Dublin, Cork and Waterford, and we also have information officers all over the country. We do a lot about recovery and well-being, so that it's a very different journey depending on how you engage with our service. If you want to find out more about what Shine does, you can go to shine.ie. Shine has been around since the 70s, and they started looking at barriers to accessing services, and they started understanding that being around and offering a service wasn't enough, that we had to start challenging our perceptions and challenging the barriers. So two things happened. You can see on the screen there, Headline and Sea Change. So Headline, which is the media monitoring and also education for journalists, there's a program there to really help change conversations in the media. It's about education, it's about understanding the impact of language, and it's about having different conversations, particularly when we look at the media and reporting on suicide and mental illnesses. So that program started in and around the same kind of time as Sea Change, and it was about having a wider conversation. And in the same way then, Shine started realising one of the barriers to accessing supports was stigma. And so Sea Change was born. So we have been around to have these conversations for the last 10 years, and it's really about what we can individually do. So why we're here today, before we get into all our content, what I would really love to know is if you would answer a quick question for me. So Rachel, if you'd like to put the poll up, what I'm going to ask you is, do you know what to do when you feel anxious? So when we think about that, the answers would be, I understand feeling anxious and do the things that help me. I understand feeling anxious and know the things that will help if I do them. I understand anxiety, but I don't know what to do when I feel it. I feel overwhelmed by anxiety and I have no tools to help, or I don't recognize anxiety at all. So thank you to everybody who's answering. We have another number of people to take the poll. So we've got quite a mix coming in here. So we're almost at 100%. Thank you to everybody for answering. So we have quite a number of people on the call who understand feeling anxious and know the things that help if we do them. We have a few people on the call who understand feeling anxious and know and do the things, because that's the doing is the really important bit. We have, again, a number of people, so 29% understand anxiety but don't know what to do. We have 4% on the call who feel overwhelmed by anxiety and have no tools, or feel they have no tools. And then we have 3% on the call who don't recognise anxiety at all. So Rachel, if you'd like to just end the poll and share the results on that one there, just so everybody can see it. So you can see there's quite a mix around anxiety and around what we know how to do, what we know to do when we're feeling anxious. So when we start looking at what that is and how we have different conversations, that's where this conversation around COVID-19, returning to work, mental health in the workplace, it's where this guide came from, and it's where this conversation came from. We want to understand what is it we can do to have a different conversation. So we hope that after today that you will understand a little bit more about anxiety in general and how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted that. We want you to see the difference between stress and anxiety, because there is a difference. We want to have a little bit more understanding on how we can overcome some of those workplace challenges on returning to work and that anxiety we feel, particularly because of the pandemic. We want to understand a little bit more about what our workplaces can do and how we can engage in that, and how the workplace can be easier for employees to engage. We'd like to recognise mental health stigma, because that's really important, because there's public stigma that's done to somebody, or there's self-stigma that we do to ourselves. So it's important that we recognise both of those. We really want to understand more about showing compassion and having supportive conversations. So that's really at the heart of what we do, that supportive piece. And lastly, we'd like to know a little bit more about improving our overall mental health and well-being. So really, to understand what is mental health stigma, we would like to have a different conversation, as I keep harping on about. Really what this is about is understanding stigma in the first place. And we now have a number of different booklets. And just to mention, actually, to keep your chat box open, because as we're going through this, this seminar or workshop today, there is going to be a load of information sharing from Sea Change. And also after this event as well, an email will go out via the Eventbrite that you signed up for that will have all of the links. But particularly, I'd like to draw your attention to the Stand Up to Stigma guide. This is available in print if you want one. It is also available for download from our website. This particularly speaks about stigma in a way that we can understand, and it breaks it down from a point of view of understanding the building blocks. So we talk about lack of understanding, we talk about knowledge, we talk about stereotyping, and we talk about discrimination. So those are the building blocks when we think about stigma. And the thing about the stigma really is that it's prejudice. If somebody has decided something without all the information or without knowing the person, and they've decided it already. So maybe somebody has decided this thing about me before they know my story, before they know anything about the details. They already have this idea. The other thing that we know about stigma is that it's very sticky. It tends not to go away. It tends to stay for very long periods of time. And as I mentioned, there's self-stigma as well as public stigma. So sometimes the public stigma might die down a little bit, or we might not see it as much, because certainly in the last number of years, we've seen less discrimination that is more obvious, I suppose, because people are becoming aware that we need to change how we act. The thing is that self-stigma is still very strong for a lot of people who struggle with their mental health, and it's about really having a different conversation about that. So when we look at the whole conversation about stigma in our workplaces, it is about having these conversations in a different way. It's about understanding what it feels like. So, for example, we asked one of our ambassadors, and this is Daniela Ferra, and she says, living with a mental health difficulty sometimes feels like I should win an Oscar. I can feel what's going on behind smiles and jokes. I pretend I'm happy as ever. The fear of being rejected and being denied to be any more than my diagnosis turns me into an actress. This is the piece that we really need to get to understand, that when we think about mental illness, quite often we go to a place where we presume and assume that the person is incapable, that they are dangerous, that they are sad all of the time. There's a lot of things that we presume about this person that maybe aren't correct. And the other thing that we do, and this is even in a personal way, that self-stigma piece, where we say, I can't share this information because I am fearful of how I'm going to be treated. I'm fearful that it's going to have a negative impact. And particularly when we're thinking about our workplaces, that we're looking at our colleagues, or we're looking at our managers, or we're looking at our employers and saying, if my employer or my colleagues know that I'm struggling with my mental health, are they going to kick me off a project, or are they not going to give me a project to work on, or am I not going to be able to get a job interview for progression? There's lots of things that we think of. And this is one of the things that we found when we started looking at stigma in the workplace. And to really understand a little bit more about that, I'm going to flag our workplace guide, because there is information on these stats and that topic, particularly about how people feel about having a conversation in the workplace. And going back to that fear, people are afraid of having conversations at work for lots of different reasons. And it's about how we can change that, how we can make it more comfortable for people. One of the big ways that we can get involved, and the big ways that we can individually make a difference, is starting to look at the language that we use. The thing is that quite often we don't intend to be stigmatizing to another person. We don't intend to be hurtful. We don't intend to be harmful. We don't intend to say something that is really going to stick with somebody for the rest of their lives. And the thing is that we do it, and quite often we do it unknowingly. And that's where we really need to question what we say and why we say. To be very clear, what I'm not saying is that we have to become so PC that we can say nothing and we become fearful of opening our mouths at all. It's about understanding that when we approach something with compassion and care and a little bit of information, we can completely change our conversation. So what does that look like in a conversation? And why does it matter? Why it matters is because our most recent research shows that 50% of people would consider hiding a mental health difficulty from family and friends. So if they're going to hide it from their family and friends, it also means that they're going to probably hide from their colleagues, they're going to hide it from their medical professions, and they're not going to get the support that they need. And this is the thing. So when we think about how difficult life is, just in the normal running week, we have lots of stresses and lots of worries and lots of different things changing all the time. And then we add an illness on top of that. Then we have all the challenge that goes with the illness. But what this is saying is that it's not the stresses and strains, it's not the illness, it's about the stigma, it's about the perception of, if I talk about this, if I let people know that I am having this extra struggle on top of the normal life stuff, people are going to treat me differently. They're going to see me differently. They're going to think things about me. They're going to make assumptions about me. So actually, it's probably better that I say nothing. This is where stigma really, really lives. It's in those kind of conversations where people stop doing things for fear of being treated differently and being judged. The other thing that we also see from a point of view of this lack of engagement is when we are supporting somebody that we know maybe is struggling, we have an idea, or we do know that they are going through a struggle. We're afraid of saying the wrong thing. We don't know what to say. So quite often in those moments, we say nothing. And the thing is, in the moments when we say nothing, it's not just the mental health thing we're not talking about. We're also now not talking about work. We're not talking about COVID. We're not talking about our families. We're not talking about telly. We're not talking about, what's the newest item out in the shops or whatever. We are forgetting about all of those other conversations. And the thing is that that is what makes us human, the fact that we have so many different facets and so many different elements. So when we think about the impact of stigma, it's not that we are just not talking about our mental health. We start isolating ourselves and we start isolating other people when we become fearful of saying the wrong thing and avoiding conversations with that person. So now it looks like, I'm trying to reach out to Barbara, and I know she hasn't been great for the last little while, but actually I'm a little bit concerned because I think she's struggling and I'd really like to help, but I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. Maybe I'll wait until next week and see if she's doing a bit better, and I'll reach out to her then. But then next week comes and maybe I'll have that same conversation. So now several weeks pass. And in the meantime, Barbara is sitting in silence, not getting those phone calls and probably making assumptions as to why people are not reaching out to her. And that's the bit. So it's absolutely okay to reach out to somebody and have other conversations, talk about the weather, talk about work, talk about what's going on in your life, and ask them, how are you doing? And sometimes when we ask that question, we're afraid of what people are going to say. So it is about how do we have a different conversation around some of that. So when we're looking at really what can I do to make a change? How can I have a different conversation? We're asking you to educate yourself, and the kind of things that we can do to educate ourselves is really to read more about it. So go to our website, seechange.ie, have a look at some of the resources that we have. They are all free. And like I mentioned as well, if you'd even like a hard copy, we can send them in the post to you. So if you would like some copies of those, you can email us at info@seechange.ie or commsofficer@seechange.ie, and the address will be in the chat for you. Education is really about understanding the things that we didn't know, because here's the thing, we don't know what we don't know, and that's okay. But when we realize that there's a gap and we realize that we need to know more about this, or that maybe our behavior is lacking because we don't know enough, that's when we can say, actually, I can take an action, I can do something, I can go and educate myself on this. So asking a person how they're feeling, I think that is such an empowering thing. And sometimes it's about asking twice, because quite often we have this piece where we ask, we say, how are you doing? And the person will say, I'm fine, or I'm grand, but they don't really get into it. So then sometimes it's about, checking back in, or working the conversation around in a different way. And maybe sometimes in the way that we do that is we might even share something ourselves. I've been struggling a little bit myself. So we're just opening that door and making it safe to have that conversation. That piece around active listening is so important, and it's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because we should listen twice as much as we speak. What active listening means is that we listen to receive the information, we listen for that person to be heard. So we're not trying to fix them, we're not trying to jump in with answers, we're not listening for the gap. So waiting for that person to stop speaking so that we can jump in with what we think they need to hear, or the advice we'd like to give them. Sometimes that active listening might be even repeating something back. So what I've heard, or you just said, so we're repeating back to them to validate what they've said and let them know that you've heard them. Acknowledging that person's experience. So even when we don't understand, even if we haven't had that experience ourselves, we can still validate their experience by saying, that must be really hard for you, or even, I can't imagine what that's like. Tell me about that. What's that like for you? I think that's the bit where we really let somebody feel that they have been heard by you. When we acknowledge how difficult somebody's experience is, even when we have no idea what that's like. And particularly looking at the language we use. So when we start thinking about, well, what kind of language is it? And where is that in the conversations that we have? COVID-19 has changed the way we have conversations. In lots of ways, it's opened the door for us to talk about anxiety and loneliness, panic, stress, worry, all of those things, which is fantastic. It really is. The thing is that sometimes when we're talking about these things, we're doing it in such a way that we're using stigmatizing language. So for example, the kind of things that we might say that maybe we need to be more mindful of is, if I am, for example, going down to supermarket, and I find that I'm surrounded by lots and lots of people. So for example, we have just changed how we live in the last couple of days, because all of the restrictions have been lifted. So now we don't have to social distance quite as much. More people are allowed in the same space. We don't have to wear the masks. Maybe people aren't sanitizing, we're not witnessing them doing it the way that we were before. And so that might build an awful lot of anxiety in ourselves as we're experiencing that. And that's absolutely okay, but it's what we do about it and how we speak about it. So let's say I've had that experience where I've gone to the supermarket and it's been challenging for me. There's been people that I feel are too close, or watching some of the different things going on after having an experience of being so physically distant and having the masks and all this for so long. But then I come home and I say, God, it was crazy down in the shops. When I'm saying that it's crazy down in the shops, one of the things that I'm saying is that it's out of control, or that I felt uncomfortable with it. So it's about understanding, why are we using that word? Because here's the thing, if I say to somebody, oh, it's absolutely crazy down there, or so-and-so is crazy, or a crazy thing happened down in the shop, maybe the person I'm speaking to has experienced a mental illness or mental health difficulty and been labeled as crazy. And maybe they're listening to you, and maybe they don't really hear some of the rest of the things you're saying, because they're starting to hear that you associate crazy with negative, and you are putting judgment on that, and you're using that kind of language, which is going to shut down the opportunity to have a conversation with that person at a later point. So it's about understanding, what can I say instead? So maybe to say, I had a challenging experience, or it was really intense. Because the other thing, when we start using language like crazy, because it feels out of control, we start getting physical responses to it sometimes as well. So we get that, muscle tension, maybe our breathing changes, maybe our temperature changes. And that has an effect on our own mental health as well, because we go into that fight or flight mode. So it's about understanding that our language has a massive impact on our mental health, and particularly when we're talking about COVID-19 and where all of that is. So I want to talk just for a minute about what stress is, and then I'm going to talk about anxiety, just to have a look at the difference between the two. So when we talk about stress, we've all experienced stress in different ways, but we see that it affects our lives in different ways. So in our body, we might find that we are very, very tired, or we might find that we have more aches. There's lots of ways that symptoms of stress show up. Sometimes it might even be a pain in the stomach or those kind of things. In our mind, we have this worry that's just cycling. And really, it's about the impact of that. So when we start looking at how we feel, that quite often we'll notice that maybe we're becoming a little bit more irritable, we're maybe being a little bit more irrational, we're maybe being less focused than we normally would, or being able to concentrate less. These are all very, very normal experiences. And then one of the last ones there, the behavior then. So when we feel that we are irritable, maybe we're going to lash out, and we're going to be a little bit harsher in the language, in the conversations that we have. Maybe insomnia, so maybe we're not going to sleep as well. So when we start thinking of those things and that impact, it's about understanding what stress looks like for you, because for every person it is slightly different, and how we respond to it is slightly different. And to understand then the difference of what anxiety is as opposed to stress. So when we talk about anxiety, it's about feelings of fearfulness, feelings of being nervous. So that piece of stress, so people can feel anxious and stressed at the same time, but it doesn't always have to be. So you can feel stressed but not anxious. But most often, if you struggle with anxiety, you probably feel stressed at the same time. A lot of people who experience anxiety also feel very physical feelings in their body. So that feeling that their body is very heavy, or that they don't have the energy to move in the same way. And that feeling jittery, so it's nearly like having the shakes inside. And that tension, so we can get a lot more muscle pain and stiffness, and just a really physical feeling of tightness. The worry would be heightened, and quite often when we're in a state of anxiety, that worry really, really spirals, and it can get out of control with catastrophizing thinking as well. That restlessness we see, it's about feeling unable to control that space. And I think that's the difference when we really look at the difference between stress and anxiety. It's about the impact of what it does and the physical space that it is. So to talk a little bit about the challenges that we have and how we can move through some of those feelings of stress and anxiety as we're returning to our workplace, and what some of those challenges might be. So some of the challenges, and again, it's really, really helpful if you haven't seen our workplace guide yet, we do have a whole list of things. So if I can show you, I know I'm probably teeny tiny on the screen at this point, but we have these. So we have what the challenge is, and then we have what to do about it in the opposite box. So there's lots of different things here. So for example, if I'm very concerned about contracting COVID-19, and I'm going into my workplace for the first time in a long time, having to touch things like door handles, maybe I'm considering, well, who cleaned that? Do I have to clean it? What do I do in this instance? Again, sharing space. So maybe the space that we are sharing has changed since we were there last. Maybe we are the person who has been in the office all of the time, and we're now experiencing other staff members coming into that space. Or maybe we're the staff member who is now returning to the workplace and it's changed. Or even just that piece about the societal reintegration, because we've all been so isolated and so physically apart that coming together can cause stress and anxiety. So looking at how that impacts us, that piece around being more tired, we need to be more compassionate and understand that it is a very normal response to be more tired, because we're concentrating more. Because bearing in mind, When we are in stress mode, we're in fight or flight. So our body is looking for danger all of the time. So it's very normal when we come home and we feel safe then that our body puts it down. And then we feel exhausted because we've been in that fight or flight all day. So it is about understanding this in a different way. Some of the things that we can do to reduce anxiety. So obviously, first of all, before we even get to reduce it, we need to start being physically aware. So when I went through that list, I was mentioning a couple of different things that you might feel when you're anxious. So let's say you're going through your working day and you suddenly realize that you have a tightness in your chest, or you have a really bad headache, or you've got a little bit of a shake either in your hands or your foot. Maybe it's that moment to check in and kind of go, where is that coming from? Or how long have I been feeling like that? Maybe it's only in the last 5 minutes, but maybe actually I've been feeling like that all morning. Maybe now is not the time to get a cup of coffee, because maybe coffee is going to make me feel more anxious, more uptight. Maybe now is a really good time for me to step outside and have a breath of fresh air, or lift the phone and connect with somebody that I care about that helps to ground me. The kind of things that we can do that are in our control. While there are a lot of people who are not wearing masks anymore, some people still feel more comfortable wearing them, and that's absolutely okay. So when we talk about what we can do, having conversations is really important. So discussing what that might look like, and so those arrangements around hygiene, we can have those conversations with our managers and with our colleagues. Getting familiar with the changes and looking to see if there are policies that have come into place or procedures that have come into place. All of those things are really important. And that last piece, again, giving yourself extra time, being compassionate, being kind to yourselves, it's really important that we do this. So this, I love this, because this is the thing that sometimes we are so busy in our lives supporting other people and doing things for others. So we are either supporting our colleagues, or maybe it's our family members. Maybe we have kids at home, maybe it's pets, maybe we're going outside and looking after people in different scenarios. The thing is that if we don't mind ourselves, we are always going to be pouring from an empty cup. So it really is about looking at how you can support yourself while we are dealing with all of these changes. Again, if you look at our COVID-19 guide, there are a couple of tips there, like the 5 ways to well-being, which signpost things that you can do to help to mind your mental health. So supporting your staff, these are the different things that we can do for each other. So whether we are in a management role or not, we can have different conversations. So the kind of things that we are suggesting to organisations and to employers: to give clear direction and leadership, provide reorientation and a debrief, arranging reasonable work relation adjustments if needed, discussing travel to and from work. So for example, there is an awful lot more people on the roads now, and there's a lot more traffic than there has been for nearly 2 years. So that's the conversation that we need to be having around the anxiety that we feel maybe about that. Do we need to leave a little bit earlier? Can we change our working times? So these are conversations that we can have. When we're talking about encouraging self-care, again, self-care is very individual, but there are certain things we can do. So for example, with my team, we spend time every week where we have a catch up on a cuppa. We're not allowed to talk about work, and we're not allowed to talk about COVID-19 either. So we end up talking about cats, we end up talking about TV, we end up talking about all sorts of stuff, but it gives us a chance to reconnect as human beings. And sometimes we remind each other of different things, like going for a walk, or, there are so many different things from a self-care perspective that we can do. But from the poll question at the beginning, sometimes it's not knowing about the thing you can do, it's about actively doing it. So it's about how we support people, and particularly how we support our friends and colleagues to work well from home. Looking back at that conversation about how do we have these different conversations, one of the things that we have seen is that for people who have experienced stigma and who have experienced mental health difficulties, and that self-stigma piece, that they see actions happen and sometimes make this assumption or presume that it is aimed towards the fact that they've had a mental illness. So you can see there, the physically distant doesn't have to mean socially distant. And you have one colleague saying, she didn't come over and say hi, she must know that I've been having a tough time and not want to talk to me because of that. When in reality, the other person is saying, it's really good to see her again, and it's a shame I can't go over and give her a hug to say hello because of the 2-meter distancing. So sometimes it's about being brave and having that conversation and owning that piece and saying, well, what is this? What facts do I know? What is the information I have about the assumptions that I'm making right now, regardless of which side of the conversation you're on? So it really is about trying to engage with ourselves in a different conversation. So when we're talking about workplace wellbeing, how to engage and those kind of conversations, we're delighted to engage with Alma Healy. So Alma has been on the Sea Change journey through our workplace program for some time, and she is going to join us now and tell us about some of the wonderful things that she has been doing with her team at AIB Homes. Alma, you're very welcome.
Good morning, and I'm delighted to be here this morning and to share a bit of background on our journey so far. First, I'd like to just talk about AIB Group. AIB Group have a very active wellbeing team. They actually formed a community of advocates. There were 145 advocates who are passionate about all things wellbeing. The AIB wellbeing team use the HEART acronym to take a holistic view of somebody's well-being. So H is for health, mental and physical health. E is economic, so somebody's financial well-being. A is somebody's ambition and purpose. R is relationships, both inside and outside of work. And T is tribe, so that inclusion and diversity piece. So my own team in homes, we do look at all of those elements when we're looking after people's well-being. But in October 2020, we committed to putting additional focus on mental health, and we commenced our 6-step pledge journey with Sea Change, where we committed to reducing stigma and creating a positive culture for mental health in our workplace. In November 2021, we received our Sea Change accreditation, which was fantastic, but by no means did we see this as the end of our journey, but more at the beginning, and we plan to build on our momentum more and more. I thought I'd share with you this morning some of the key things that we've learned and some tips with you. And, you know, in welcoming people back to the workplace, maybe some of these things might help you to look after people and their well-being as they come back to work. So one of the things that really worked for us was creating a team. We can achieve so much more together. So I talked about the AIB Group wellbeing team having a group of advocates, of which I'm one myself, but also my own team in homes. We're spread throughout the country, and we have a large team in direct as well. So we have lots of different needs, you know, depending on who we are and where we're based. So we also formed a team of champions. We have 15 champions across all of our sub teams in homes, and these champions, like the beauty of it is that not one size fits all. So while we can share our themes and ideas each month, it's the champions who will know how best to implement that locally and what will work best for their teams and their people. Another thing that we did that worked really well for us was we created a statement of commitment. Now, this ended up being really powerful because we brought a group of people together from across our teams, and so it was very meaningful to us and something that we felt would really work for us. And we then brought our statement of commitment to our people leaders, who read and understood it and actually committed to live by our statement of commitment. So the synergy between our champions and our people leaders working together to keep the focus on mental health and to continue to have the topic on our agendas at work, and that has been really, really powerful. Our own statement of commitment, it's a page long, so there's lots and lots in it and quite specific actions and activities. But I think two of the key points from our statement of commitment is that mental health is for everyone. I think that's really important, because there might be people there who think that mental health is for other people and not for them. But actually, everybody has mental health, and we all need to look after our own. And the other piece is that mental health is as important as physical health, because, you know, there's an awful lot of information out there about how to look after your physical health. So our statement of commitment is about putting the equal emphasis on looking after our mental health as well. There's lots more in our statement of commitment as well, but I just thought they were two of the highlights that I would share with you from it. So the other thing is about understanding how people are really feeling. And so I like to ask people how they're feeling and to encourage open dialogue, because that's the only way we'll really know how we can help somebody. To this end, we had an event at the end of last year, which was facilitated by a Sea Change ambassador. It was a truly wonderful event. It both the ambassador and our own people opened up genuinely, honestly. They spoke from the heart about any challenges they might be having. And more than that, the response from everybody else was so encouraging and so supportive to those who had spoken out. It was a really emotional event, and I think it really opened the doors for people feeling that they could speak openly about their mental health, which was absolutely super. Um, I I do want to acknowledge that in our team in homes in AIB, we have had people working on site throughout the pandemic, and we have had we are now welcoming people coming back on site to work for the first time in a few years. So like each person, as I said, will have a different need, and so it's really just to make sure that we keep it at the forefront, that not one size fits all. Another thing, I suppose, that happened in my team in homes as a result of being on the 6-step pledge journey and putting that additional focus on mental health was we have quarterly recognition events, and where we recognise our top performers and people who've gone over and above and outside of their role. And in one quarter, there actually happened to be 2 awards given out for people who had spoken out about their mental health or in relation to mental health activities. And it was just so fantastic to see that happening. It really showed, the positive culture that was being created around mental health in our workplace. So look, I hope some of those tips might have helped somebody this morning. And if anybody has any questions or anything like that later on, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Alma. And I think it's really important that we do have those conversations in the workplace. I think it's wonderful that you've had that experience. And at Sea Change, we are delighted that we were able to support AIB Homes to have this journey, to see the difference in the conversations that you're having at work because of the open culture that you're creating and the way that you're making it easier for people to have those conversations is really what it's about. And so thinking about some of those things, and to answer a question that's gone into the Q&A as well, looking at people experience things differently, and you mentioned there that everybody's individual, which is really important that we acknowledge that. And also from our point of view, that when we come back into the workplace, we don't know what somebody else has experienced. We don't know what has been going on for them. And I think that the question in the Q&A is really about how do we support conversations if somebody has been bereaved by a loss and they are experiencing something that others can't engage with, or they don't have that same experience. And that's going back to that piece about compassion. We don't have to have had the same experience as somebody to be able to be empathetic towards them or to be compassionate and kind to them. And I think some of the things that Alma has spoken about there really looks at having that really open conversation and seeing that we are all different, we are all individual, and that kindness piece can really make a difference. And coming together to do these things together and have different conversations really does help. There is some more information again around grief and loss in the COVID-19 guide, so I would flag that for you on that particular topic. So thanks again, Alma. And at this point now, I would like to come to our next speaker. So I'm just going to share screen for a moment and give you a little intro to Abigail. So Abigail has been with us for some time. Abigail is one of our wonderful Sea Change ambassadors. So I'm going to leave you read the piece that's there, but to say that having people like Abigail share her story is so important is an understatement, because through the bravery, and you heard Alma say that some of her colleagues came forward and shared their stories because they wanted to make a difference. Through the bravery of our ambassadors, we are making a difference. And Abigail has been an absolute champion, because not only does she do stuff with Sea Change, but she does stuff with lots of other organisations because of her passion in creating change to do with mental health, understanding and breaking down the stigma. So Abigail, you are most welcome to join us. I'm delighted that you are with us, and I am going to hand over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barbara. I'm not sure if my sound is okay, but unless I hear otherwise, I'll keep going ahead. Perfect.
You're all good.
Amazing. So thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. It's been quite some time since I've actually spoken for Sea Change. But it is, as Barbara was saying, a really, really big passion of mine to kind of normalize the conversation surrounding mental health. So I'm delighted to be here. But as said, I've been an ambassador since 2017, so 5 years now, which is really, really strange to think of, the person who I was when I started this journey. But I guess I became a Sea Change ambassador to kind of highlight my experience with my mental health difficulties. So they really started to kind of come into my life in great effect when I was 17. I was diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression. I was having trouble getting into school. I missed a lot of school from 5th year to 6th year, just not even being able to get into school because of anxiety, having panic attacks every day, a really, really low, hopeless mood. And I really didn't see myself getting to the age of 18 at all. It was definite in my mind that I was never going to make it to that age, let alone to where I am today. So I'm really happy to share my story and to provide a little bit of hope, but to provide a bit of relatability to maybe some people out there who have felt the way I have in the past, or maybe going through something that I can talk about today. But in terms of COVID-19, it completely changed my life in terms of the way I operated, in terms of the way I lived. Before COVID-19, my life was very hectic, very chaotic. I was always on the run, always moving, always going from event or to work or to college at the time. And I think I was somehow trying to deal with my anxiety and my low mood and being so busy that I wouldn't be able to think about it in that sort of way. And I know that a lot of people can relate to that in some place. In Ireland, if you're busy, you're successful. And that's an idea that a lot of people have. So that's kind of what I was like before COVID-19. So when that hit and everything came to a pause, life really, really slowed down. It really changed my whole perspective on life. And it was really, really intense for me to go through that change. I didn't know how to slow down, to be alone with my thoughts and my mental health difficulties for quite a lot of time, and being indoors and not being able to kind of have these distractions was really, really difficult. As others who have anxiety may know, changes outside of your control are the most terrifying things that can happen to you. And this was something that I could not control. You know, I had two parents who would have been quite vulnerable to COVID-19. So that sent my anxiety through the roof. I remember watching the announcements on TV, crying in tears, really, really terrified about what was going to happen because this was completely out of our control. So I really, really had to learn how to slow down. And especially with work as well, it was a really strange time because I had started a new job. I had been in office for 2 days and then I was sent home, and I was working from home for a year and a half nearly. At the beginning, it was okay. You know, we were kind of coming into summer. There was a bit of a novelty about the lockdown at the time. People were trying new things. People were doing different things. And I was able to kind of get outside if the weather was good, when usually my mood is a little bit better. But then when we got into kind of the winter months, we got into kind of October, November, December, the pandemic really, really hit me in a really difficult way because I was waking up, starting work, having lunch at home, getting back to work, finishing work, sitting on the couch watching TV and going to bed, because that's all I could do. We literally couldn't do anything else. Sometimes I would get a walk in if I had energy after work. And it was really, really dismal for me in a way that I can't even express. I felt like I wasn't living. I felt like I was simply surviving. And to feel that way is really, really difficult, especially at my age, which I was 23 at the time. I was thinking, these are the best years of my life, and I'm sitting here simply trying to survive. And it was quite heartbreaking for me. And because of the kind of the stagnation I was feeling, and all my anxiety is building up from just not doing anything. I actually ended up in hospital around this time last year, because it all got a little bit too much. You know, it was really, really difficult. I had to get used to the lockdown in the first place. And then I guess I got too used to lockdown. I was, okay, I'm just going to stay in all the time now. When things loosened up a bit for people with anxiety, it's really difficult to do these changes, you know, and especially with the lockdown in Ireland, it can go from absolutely all the restrictions to no restrictions in a minute. And that's really, really difficult. So I did end up in hospital for about 6 weeks, and it completely saved me. It took me out of the space I needed to be in. I did really get good help from where I was. And yeah, it's something that I have had shame about myself. Self-stigma is something that's really, really, really prominent, and something that it's probably one of the biggest stigmas that I experience is self-stigma, especially in the workplace. And the way I try to combat that is just being as, even if it's fake confidence, it's still there. Even if it's in a job interview and people are saying, what are you interested in? I say, oh, I'm interested in mental health because, you know, I've suffered from anxiety and depression and I've had really, really bad times. And these are in job interviews and meeting clients and meeting other people. They see that fake confidence, even if it might be fake some days. They see that and they see me being so open and so secure in what I'm saying that they think, wow, okay, this is a topic that we can really talk about. That's what I try and do in the workplace. No matter the self-stigma I feel, you know, sometimes I feel, okay, maybe I shared too much on LinkedIn about my mental health difficulties because future employers might see it, colleagues might see it, maybe they'll bring it up in the workplace. And I will go into overthinking. Okay, if they bring it up in the workplace, I'll say, oh, it was just about this, or, oh, yes, that's just a project that I'm doing, or, oh, yeah, I don't want to talk about it here. I would overthink it to death and back. So it's really, really something that I struggle with, self-stigma. And I feel that a lot of people who have anxiety and have that tendency to overthink and catastrophize really do experience it. In terms of stigma in the workplace from other people, I have experienced it, of course, as unfortunately a lot of people with mental health difficulties do. And it's even the smallest things that can really make a big difference to someone who has struggled and wants to share their experience, or someone who is currently struggling. For example, I remember working one day, and this was a couple of years ago, in a restaurant, and someone was telling me, oh, I live in Lucan. And I said, oh, I actually used to go to therapy in Lucan a few years ago. And when I say, they literally didn't say a word, they just went, okay, and walked away from me. And it was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. People often don't mean any harm, but they don't know what to say. And that's kind of the hardest thing to deal with, when people don't know what to say and instead they don't say anything at all. Like Barbara often mentions, it can be just as difficult and just as dangerous. You know, when we talk about going back to the workplace, it's something that does scare me a lot, and something that I want to kind of make sure that people realize you do have a choice in what you're doing and where you're going. And if you're someone who is facilitating a workplace, please, please, please give your employees the power of choice. Sometimes we don't know what we want as people who deal with mental health difficulties, but if you can give people the choice and give them the empowerment to say, actually, you know what, that's a good idea, I'll go with that, or actually, I'll go with another decision, it makes the world of difference. I worry about the smallest things, whether it being, I'm really, really worried that I won't be able to have my lunch break at this time because I usually have it at this time at home. And if I change it, it's going to annoy me for the rest of the day. And everyone in the office has it at this time. It's the smallest things. But you do have a choice when you're in the office, and there are always people you can talk to, whether that be an employee assistance program, whether that be your kind of line manager. But for those in the workplace who are facilitating it, please give the ability to choose for your employees, and be as open as you can. You know, the more people who are confident in speaking out, even if it's fake confidence, if you're confident in speaking out about your mental health, it makes a world of difference. But I am so happy to be here to speak on behalf of Sea Change. And I can see lots of amazing comments coming in. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And there is always hope out there. I mean, this time last year, I thought it was the end of everything for me. And now I'm truly thriving. It's really, really amazing to say. And if you told me this time last year I would be doing what I'm doing now, I would not have believed it at all. So thank you everyone so much for listening. And I'll pass you back to Barbara.
Thank you so much, Abigail. And also just to flag to everybody who doesn't know, Abigail hosted our podcast last year, so the Sea Change Sessions with a Little Gail. So if you want to find out more about that, you can have a look at that on Spotify and also Anchor FM. It's also available on our website, that's seachange.ie. And it's over in the tab under our work as well. So you can hear a lot more about all of our ambassadors, because Abigail did an amazing job interviewing them. But just to say thank you to Abigail. And I suppose this is the power of what we do and why we do it, because hearing her testimony and her story is really what makes what we're talking about live. It makes it real. It makes us all feel like it's normal to have these conversations and that we shouldn't be afraid. I also think the piece around, you know, not knowing what to say, it's a very normal response. And I talked about it earlier, but people are afraid of saying the wrong thing, so they say nothing. But what that person experiences is so loud and that it's lasting and the impact is huge. So sometimes it's even to be able to say, I don't know what to say to that, you know, having some comment and making it okay. Because here's the thing, it actually isn't the person who's struggling with their mental health, it isn't their discomfort, it's ours. And it's about how we learn how to have different conversations, or even to say, I don't know what that must be like for you, or that's interesting. You know, there's lots of ways that we can engage in the conversation without feeling that we have to have all the answers or all the information. So Abigail, thank you so much. And again, I would flag to everybody, follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. We have Ambassador Thursdays, and Abigail has contributed so many times over the last number of years. So there are lots of pieces of her story available through our social media and also on our website, along with all of the voices of all of our ambassadors. So just to flag, because we are coming up to the end of our event, I'm just going to share my screen again for a moment with you. So earlier on, I flagged to you that we have a number of free downloadable resources. So the first one there, what is stigma? This is a guide to understanding mental health stigma. This is based on research that we conducted in 2017. The new Reality Living with COVID guide, we created that in partnership with Mental Health Ireland, and it really is for everybody. So while there are pieces around it to speak to the workplace, there's lots there to do with speaking with our kids, having different conversations with ourselves, looking at well-being. So we would really suggest that everybody downloads that. It's an A5 guide, so it's not very big, and I think it has about 24 or 26 pages. So there's a nice amount of content there to explain everything in more detail that we've talked about today. The Mental Health Matters guide we released in November. This looks at reducing stigma in the workplace and understanding the impact of stigma in the workplace. And our Stand Up to Stigma guide we just launched last month. And that's really understanding what stigma is. So we repeated the research that we did in 2017 for the What is Stigma guide. So we would urge everybody to have a look at those. So before I go on to my last question, what I would love to do is flag for you our feedback form. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could please go to the chat now, and one of the girls has very kindly put in the chat, the feedback form is there. So if you could click on that link and give us a little bit of feedback about this event, it would help us, because we are trying to put together different content for you to help us all to have different conversations about mental health. So if you want to copy and paste that link so that you have it, because obviously we are going to close our session in a moment, but we would be grateful if you could hold on to that link and follow up in the next couple of minutes. And then lastly, I would like to go back and ask you again this question. So now that we've had a different conversation around stress and anxiety, we hope that you understand a little bit more about the difference between stress and anxiety, and sometimes what stress feels like or what anxiety feels like. You probably haven't had enough about the tips and tools of what we can do to understand anxiety and how we can make those changes. But I hope that you understand what it is, and maybe understand that you need to do a little bit more detective work to work out what might help if you are noticing a moment of anxiety. Again, I would flag that there are some steps in the COVID guide that will help you with that step-by-step piece. And we would also flag our partners at Mental Health Ireland. They have a guide on stress and a guide on anxiety, and both of those are linked in the back of our COVID guide. So thank you to everybody who is answering our poll. We have more people participating just at the moment, so if you wouldn't mind filling that poll. And thank you to everybody for sticking with us for this hour. It is still strange times that we are communicating through computers instead of being at a physical event, but we're delighted that you were able to be with us. For those of you who have colleagues and friends who could have benefited from this webinar, you're most welcome to share the link that we will have up on YouTube, and it will be made available there. Also, the guides that we have, the Mental Health Matters and the Stand Up to Stigma guide, both of those events are also available on our past events on the YouTube channel as well. So thank you very much to everybody who's participated. So Rachel, if you want to end the poll and show the results there. So we can see now that we had a couple of people at the beginning who didn't recognize anxiety and who felt overwhelmed and had no tools. So we've moved those people along. I'm absolutely delighted. And I hope that this is the beginning of a journey for you guys to start looking at what this might mean if you had a tool that you could use in a moment that you were struggling with anxiety. And for those of you who've moved up any, I'm absolutely delighted. And I hope that you do start using the tools a little bit more. From all of us at Sea Change, we are absolutely delighted to support these conversations and have different conversations with you about mental health and about reducing stigma. We'd like to say thank you to all of you for making the time to make this important in your day. And if you want to find out more about what we do, please go to seachange.ie.